we identify as Marxist-Leninists. But we also think that there's a big distinction between Marxism-Leninism as it's translated into the West and Marxism-Leninism as an index of historical experience in Russia, China. So I think we want to take this as an opportunity to kind of expand upon what we consider those crucial differences to be and why we think a new approach for Westerners is necessary in order to catch up with the experiences of Marxist-Leninist practice globally. So in the case of China, the question of what is Marxist-Leninist theory is only a kind of practical question in a sense. The raw material or the substance, whatever you want, to which this theory is being applied is something that a person in China can take for granted. So what is this basis? It's the Chinese national or even civilizational, whatever you want to call it, sense. Mao Zedong, when he speaks of the need to apply Marxism to Chinese conditions, he is able to take for granted his acute understanding of the Chinese situation, which may as well be shared by all Chinese people, more or less. Then Marxism-Leninism is not a question of legislating your sense from zero, but clarifying it. This is why in the East, Marxism-Leninism takes such a apparently limited scope. It's all very basic, it's all very simplified, when it's recorded. The problem is that Westerners see this and they do this kind of Cartesian reduction where they think that that's all it is, and that this can replace reality itself. But in China or in Russia or wherever you want, they're taking a reality and a sense in relation to that reality for granted. And this is what we consider, the Infrared Collective, we consider to be missing in the West. So why we're called Infrared is because we're trying to tap into this sense, which is not on the visible spectrum of light. It's not on the surface. You have to have a deeper sense.
Yeah, so what basically distinguishes our position with China and Russia and the other former or current communist states is that Marxism-Leninism or socialism acquired an objectivity. That is, it was already a ground on which people could take for granted, like you said, that people stood on before they could think. And what theory's job was to clarify practical questions. So in China, it was the war for national liberation, right? To resist imperialist aggression. In Russia, it took the form not only of this, but also of catching up with the West, of industrializing. Or even returning to the being of to the being of the state, right? To the peasantry, through collectivization. Yeah, to the Russian people. But in the West, this is missing. What's instead taken place of this kind of sense, which again, it's sense because although it can be clarified by thinking, by thought, it's something that that precedes it and which gives thought direction. It's a practical question. In other words, leftists here, they kind of begin ex nihilo. They begin without this sense. They begin with thought to then arrive at a more beautiful form of it, but they don't engage this with the objectivity that precedes them. You know what I mean? With what they're already dealing with.
Yeah, they substitute the sense with the forms of thought. They think something called Marxist-Leninist theory, which is very laid out in a very simple and concrete way. If you read the classics that are available from the experiences of Russia and China and so on and so on, they think that's a substitute for the sense, when really that's meant to clarify some kind of already existing sense. That's why in the West, Marxist-Leninists just appear psychotic. They're cults, or they're just really enclosed. They don't have a sense of a wider reality that the people they're taking inspiration from are able to kind of have already.
And I think at the same time, I mean, this is, although it becomes explicit and objective in the form of national economy or culturally in China and Russia, this is already even apparent in Marx. I mean, it's not as if this doesn't have a precedence in Marx and Engels, and in Marx's before 1917. Because what is Marx doing, right? He's clarifying, in his later work, especially with Gotha, he is critiquing prevailing social circles for a lack of what we call objective sense, right? For a lack of stake in existing reality.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Marx, I think there's a deep philosophical, or, that's really tough to say, philosophical, post-philosophical, whatever you want, but there's an element to this that goes very deep in Marx. His break with not simply Hegel, but more specifically the young Hegelians, and then Feuerbach, and so on and so on, can be condensed in this critique of the reign of pure form or pure abstraction that occludes, almost in a way that others have, like Kojève have pointed out, is similar to Heidegger, that occludes that aspect of reality that cannot be preemptively assimilated into any consistent form or idea or thought. So for Marx, material reality is something, it's similar to the object of what we're talking about is the sense that is able to exist in outside of the West. But
it's why he talks about submitting to laws, he calls laws, but submitting to objectivity, right? Instead of beginning with this kind of Cartesian subsumption of all reality to form.
But the problem with Western leftists, and this is where we really take our point of departure, is that there's something terrifying about this insight. The reason it's terrifying is because it shows you cannot preemptively be safe or comfortable in any type of position. There's no such thing as Marxist-Leninist theory that you're going to be able to take refuge from at the expense of reality. You have to immerse yourself in the whole wealth of reality, even the things that are not halal, apparently halal or whatever, in order to prove the actual meaning of and practical significance of Marxism-Leninism, which is not to create a separate reality away from the real one, but to help clarify and distill.
Exactly. I think that's a good way of putting it, because the function of Marxism, and especially I think self-proclaimed Marxist-Leninists in the United States, tankies or whatever, so-called tankies, is that see, we're the real tankies. They're the idolaters. But is that for them, Marxism is like it's a way to escape reality, to fall into like a safe, cozy kind of doctrine to which you can always retreat into. That's why they're obsessed with this purely, because aesthetic has a real deep meaning, right? And that is a part of objective sense. But they retreat into a purely detached aesthetic from China, Soviet Union, with like this obsession with like music or tanks or whatever. That's detached from the actual objectivity to the particularity of those of those phenomena. You know what I mean? It's like it for them is a haven from reality.
Again,
but
they
for them themselves, it was embedded in reality.
Again, what they do is something really perverted. Is that they accomplish this kind of Cartesian reduction of what's on the surface in China or in Russia or wherever else in the world, and they think that's it. That's the way in which I have access to the objective essence of this phenomenon, is simply identifying with the superficial appearance. What they don't understand is that underlying this appearance is a deeper sense of the objective.
That's where the dogmatism comes from, the staticness of the thought of the West, is because it's not connected.
Even during the heyday of China's Cultural Revolution, the level of obscene dogmatism that prevailed among Western Maoists, this stuff is not the stuff that can keep states together. It's not the stuff that that is possible to be in power anywhere. I mean, the thought of Western leftists, Western Marxist-Leninists, it's a purely reflexive phenomenon in the West, but in Africa, Latin America, wherever you go, that there are Marxist-Leninists, these are people who have a profound and deep national, whatever you want to call it, sense of their own people. And this almost, in a sense, it comes first. Marxism-Leninism is just helping them clarify this reality where it appears, where the appearance of contradiction inevitably makes itself apparent. Facing contradictions is an inevitability for humanity in general. So
that's why, though, so many Western Marxists or socialists are confused by China and Russia, and they decry these communist parties as nationalists. You've given way to nationalism or whatever, but they don't get it. They don't get that the point of Marxism was to clarify what whatever they want to call nationalism, but to clarify national reality that already exists, that you can't legislate away in thought.
It's like this. The way I would respond to this is that maybe there is something arbitrary about borders that exist in some countries. They're not necessary, but there is something objective about nations, and that objectivity may go beyond the bounds of what is traditionally considered a nation. Is China or Russia a nation? I don't think they are. Russia is a multinational civilization, and so is China. But nonetheless, these are denegating or referring to real objective realities that are not reducible to some kind of identity. In the West, the manner by which Marxism-Leninism has been translated you've never been able to come close with people who simply just call themselves Marxist-Leninists in the West. Now, I'll say there are exceptions in terms of practical organizations like the Panthers, the Black Panthers, but their organization was not founded upon being Marxist-Leninists. The organization was founded upon the black community, and Marxism-Leninism had a practical significance in relation to this pressing reality and history and so on and so on.
This essential thing that we've hit upon, the separation that Western leftists have from, this deeper objectivity, it results in a lot of auxiliary problems related to history, nationhood, and so on. So, for example, when speaking of history, a lot of Western leftists will kind of take the position of rejecting tradition, almost literally rejecting and canceling history. But like, even if they're more moderate, they tend to, tend towards, work for progress. We're going to reject the old ways and so on. But in doing this, I think they kind of missed the point, because the entire point of something new is that it renews and rejuvenates what was meaningful about the old traditions and customs. And so they concede tradition and custom to conservatives, when in reality, the position should be, we are like truly inheriting, what the essence of our culture and our traditions are. And you can kind of see that's kind of what happened in relation to China and the USSR, because China did not simply, copy the USSR or try to impose the, Soviet system onto themselves. What they did is they dug deeper into their own national realities and their own culture, and their kind of cultural and political autonomy played a really big role in the production of, Chinese-style socialism.
I was going to say that I think that's really well put. Like, they try and liquidate their own objectivity, right? The very ground they stand on. And they don't see that Marxism is a way to clarify this ground itself, to articulate it, right? Like, they try and liquidate their own being, their own existence, and they take refuge from this in the kind of cozy, if you want, I don't want to call it theoretical because it's really not, but in this kind of, theoretical position, right? That's divorced from their own existence, their own being.